The political landscape of Washington, D.C. is notoriously ruthless, a high-stakes arena where careers are made or destroyed under the unblinking glare of television cameras and the relentless scrutiny of the National Press Corps. For generations, the role of White House press secretary has been viewed as one of the most grueling assignments in government, typically reserved for seasoned operatives who have spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of media relations and political warfare. Yet when the administration announced its choice for this critical position, the decision sent shockwaves through the political establishment and ignited an immediate media frenzy. Caroline Leavitt stepped up to the podium not as a veteran strategist with graying hair and decades of backroom experience, but as a young woman of 28, instantly claiming her place in history as the youngest individual ever to hold that formidable title. The announcement was met with a predictable wave of skepticism from commentators across the political spectrum, many of whom openly wondered whether someone so young could survive the daily trial by fire that defines the Brady briefing room. Critics and seasoned journalists alike sharpened their knives, anticipating a quick and public unraveling that would prove inexperience cannot be masked by ambition. However, the quiet anticipation of a sudden stumble evaporated almost the moment she took her place behind the iconic White House podium for her first official press briefing in late January. The room was packed to maximum capacity, filled with veteran reporters who had questioned multiple administrations and were fully prepared to test the mettle of this historic newcomer. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a palpable mix of curiosity and undisguised doubt as the first sharp questions were hurled toward the front of the room. Instead of faltering, retreating into the safe harbor of vague, pre-scripted talking points, or casting nervous glances at her briefing binders, Leavitt commanded the room with an authoritative presence that caught even her most vocal detractors completely off guard. For nearly an uninterrupted hour, she fielded rapid-fire inquiries regarding complex policy decisions, sensitive administration strategies, and contentious issues of media access, without once losing her footing or showing a single flicker of hesitation. She countered aggressive questioning with sharp, measured rebuttals, skillfully reframed hostile narratives, and maintained absolute control over an audience that had fully expected her to break under the pressure. This commanding performance did not materialize out of thin air, nor was it the product of a privileged upbringing within a powerful political dynasty that smoothed her path into the upper echelons of government power. Raised in the scenic, fiercely independent state of New Hampshire, Caroline was born into a hardworking family that built its livelihood entirely through the grit and unpredictability of operating local small businesses. From a very young age, she watched her parents navigate the daily anxieties and triumphs of entrepreneurship, learning firsthand that respect, security, and success are never inherited or guaranteed, but must be earned through relentless effort. This foundational understanding of the American working class followed her into her college years, a time when many of her peers were still casually exploring potential career paths and enjoying the social rhythms of university life. While others drifted, she was already intensely focused on the mechanics of political communication, dedicating her free hours to writing analytical opinion pieces that vigorously defended conservative principles and examining how media narratives shape public consciousness. Driven by a growing conviction that young conservative voices were being systematically marginalized or ignored within mainstream academic and cultural institutions, she took matters into her own hands by launching a student-led campus broadcasting initiative. This early project was born out of a desire to create an authentic alternative platform, providing her with invaluable real-time experience in production, messaging, and on-camera delivery that would ultimately define her rapid professional trajectory. Her early roles within the fast-paced communications ecosystem of the Trump White House served as an intense professional finishing school, placing her squarely inside the ultimate pressure cooker of national politics. In those high-intensity corridors, she watched with meticulous attention as complex administrative messages were carefully crafted, historical press briefings were strategically mapped out, and unpredictable national crises were managed in real time under global scrutiny. She absorbed the subtle art of political rhetoric and crisis management, realizing that in the modern media landscape, speed, confidence, and adaptability are just as critical as the policy positions being defended. Recognizing that the traditional information ecosystem was undergoing a massive, permanent disruption, she consciously expanded her media footprint far beyond the conventional networks during subsequent campaign cycles, frequently appearing on independent digital platforms and popular podcasts. This deliberate strategy allowed her to bypass the curated filters of legacy media organizations, speaking directly to an increasingly fragmented audience that valued raw authenticity over polished establishment narratives. While her supporters viewed this digital outreach as a brilliant innovation that modernized political communication, her detractors dismissed it as mere disruption designed to evade rigorous journalistic accountability. Regardless of the conflicting viewpoints surrounding her methods, one reality became undeniably clear to observers across the political landscape. This young woman from New Hampshire could no longer be easily dismissed as an inexperienced lightweight. Yet, while her public persona grew increasingly sharp, disciplined, and formidable on the national stage, her private life was quietly entering its most profoundly vulnerable and emotionally exhausting chapter. In the height of summer, as the national political climate reached a boiling point ahead of a monumental election cycle, Caroline gave birth to her first child, a son named Nicholas Robert Rixio, affectionately known to the family as Nico. The timing of her transition into motherhood was far from peaceful, occurring amidst an extraordinarily volatile political environment that grew more hostile by the day. A shocking, historic assassination attempt against the candidate during the peak of the campaign season had sent massive shockwaves through the fabric of the country, heightening anxieties and accelerating the pace of an already breathless news cycle. Just days after bringing her newborn son home from the hospital, Leavitt made the deeply personal and highly controversial decision to return to the intense demands of the campaign trail much sooner than anyone had anticipated. This rapid return provoked an immediate wave of intense public debate, with some praising her fierce dedication to the cause, while others openly questioned whether such a choice was healthy or appropriate for a new mother. Reflecting on that chaotic period much later, she candidly admitted that the profound experience of motherhood had fundamentally altered her internal perspective and reshaped her entire approach to her demanding career. Step into the role of a wife and a mother did not serve as a chaotic distraction from her professional obligations, as some critics had predicted. Instead, it provided a powerful, stabilizing anchor that grounded her amidst the madness. The vicious criticisms, personal attacks, and relentless media scrutiny that swirled around her head on a daily basis suddenly lost their ability to inflict emotional damage once she returned home each evening. Walking through her front door shifted her reality completely, transforming her from a public combatant into a mother welcomed by a loving husband and a newborn child who cared absolutely nothing for political headlines. For months following her return, she successfully projected that same signature, unshakable confidence that the American public and the Washington press corps had firmly come to expect from her. She effortlessly managed volatile headlines, fielded incredibly hostile inquiries, and rigidly maintained her professional composure, never allowing a single drop of personal emotion to seep through her disciplined exterior. The seasoned journalists who populated the White House briefing room daily knew her strictly as a highly focused, unflappable professional who treated the podium as a defensive shield, which is why the sudden cracking of her facade stunned everyone present. The abrupt shift in the room occurred during a routine exchange when the conversation unexpectedly veered away from cold policy data and partisan warfare, focusing instead on the deeply personal dynamics of her life outside the West Wing. For the first time in her public career, the conversation centered on the quiet, unassuming man who stood in the shadows, entirely responsible for making her demanding public life sustainable. This moment pulled back the curtain on an exceptionally unusual and deeply private love story that defied the conventional expectations of Washington society. Caroline first crossed paths with the man who would become her husband, Nicholas Rixio, during one of the most overwhelmingly hectic, chaotic, and professionally uncertain periods of her entire life. At the age of 25, she was poured every ounce of her remaining energy into a grueling, fast-paced congressional campaign, crisscrossing the state of New Hampshire to connect with voters. Her days were a blur of early morning town halls, localized small business visits, late-night strategy sessions with campaign staff, and an endless succession of hands to shake in crowded community centers. Her singular laser-like focus during this intense period was to win the highly competitive seat, leaving absolutely no room in her schedule or her mind for personal distractions or romantic pursuits. The initial introduction between the two occurred almost entirely by chance, facilitated by a mutual friend who owned a local restaurant and invited Nicholas to attend a nearby campaign fundraising event. It was the exact kind of high-energy political gathering where human interactions are typically brief, highly strategic, and transactional, with nearly every individual in the room calculating their next professional move or networking opportunity. Initially, their relationship was entirely unremarkable, characterized by the polite, superficial exchanges of casual acquaintances who happened to share mutual social circles within the state. There was no dramatic, Hollywood-esque spark of immediate attraction, nor was there a whirlwind romance that disrupted her focus on the ongoing election. Instead, they simply talked, observed each other's characters from a respectful distance, and maintained a consistent line of communication as the demanding campaign weeks turned into months. Over a significant period, their occasional conversations naturally began to deepen, evolving into a remarkably steady, genuine connection that felt entirely detached from the performative and superficial environment that constantly surrounded her. Nicholas was a man who had already spent decades navigating his own intricate life journey, possessing a wealth of lived experience that set him far apart from the young political operatives XKaroline usually encountered. At 60 years old, he had successfully built a remarkably lucrative and expansive real estate portfolio that stretched across the distinct communities of New Hampshire and neighboring regions. However, the path that led him to this position of immense financial stability and personal independence was anything but smooth, easy, or predictable. As a young teenager, he faced severe domestic instability and economic hardship that forced him to grow up with survival instincts far ahead of his peers. He has spoken with refreshing openness about dark periods of absolute homelessness during his youth, times when he was forced to sleep uncomfortably in his car because rent was an unattainable luxury. To pull himself out of poverty, he worked grueling shifts at local grocery stores while simultaneously putting himself through the rigors of higher education. Upon earning his degree from Plymouth State University, he developed a profound fascination with the real estate market, specifically focusing his attention on neglected, dilapidated properties that other investors dismissed as entirely hopeless. The coastal community of Hampton Beach ultimately became his primary proving ground, a place where he systematically purchased the rundown structures that no one else wanted to touch. He personally repaired the structural issues that others ignored, reinvesting every dollar of profit back into his growing business with a disciplined consistency that bordered on obsession. Over the span of several decades, that relentless, unyielding work ethic transformed a desperate struggle for survival into a highly successful multi-million-dollar enterprise. By the exact time his path crossed with XKaroline, he was entirely secure financially, professionally established, and completely uninterested in public validation or media attention. He had fought, bled for, and won his personal battles long before his future wife ever took her first steps into the volatile arena of national politics. The profound 32-year age gap between them was completely obvious from the very beginning of their relationship, a stark reality that XKaroline never once attempted to downplay, hide, or apologize for to the public. In various personal interviews, she has candidly described their romantic dynamic as highly unconventional, openly acknowledging that introducing him to her family required some incredibly difficult conversations. Her own mother, in a twist that drew significant attention from online commentators, is actually younger than the man XKaroline had chosen to spend the rest of her life with. When she first revealed to her tight-knit family that she was seriously dating an individual who was nearly their age, the initial reaction was understandably cautious, filled with a deep sense of protective skepticism. It was not an environment of hostility or anger, but rather the natural, instinctive hesitation of loving parents who worried about the unique societal pressures and personal challenges their daughter would inevitably face. Nicholas, understanding the delicate nature of the situation perfectly, made absolutely no attempt to win over her family through grand, superficial gestures or flashy displays of wealth. Instead, he relied entirely on the exact same principles that had allowed him to survive his youth: absolute consistency, patience, and quiet respect. He spent hours sitting at the family table, listened intently to their concerns, and respected the boundaries they needed to establish as they adjusted to the news. Over an extended period of time, her parents stopped looking at the stark chronological number and began truly seeing the character of the man standing before them. They witnessed firsthand how deeply and selflessly he adored their daughter, and they noted how remarkably steady and unfazed he remained whenever the public eye turned its harsh light toward their relationship. Gradually, the initial layer of familial skepticism gave way to a profound sense of genuine trust, and what had once felt uncomfortable and foreign slowly became their beautiful new normal. Today, XKaroline frequently describes their internal family dynamic as a wonderfully typical relationship, one that is filled with a shared sense of humor, deep mutual respect, and ordinary daily routines. Their formal engagement arrived quietly during the peaceful lull of the Christmas holiday season, completely devoid of the elaborate public relations campaigns or staged media rollouts that often characterize Washington couples. It was defined instead by a deeply intimate, private proposal and a single, unpretentious photograph shared with loved ones to celebrate the milestone. They were officially married shortly before the historic presidential inauguration, stepping into the sacred bonds of matrimony and the pages of political history within mere days of one another. Predictive critics and political cynics immediately began to speculate wildly about the precise timing of the wedding, with some suggesting it was a calculated public relations strategy designed to soften her image. However, those individuals who existed within their inner circle described something far less calculated and infinitely more human: two distinct people choosing to promise each other stability in a deeply chaotic world. As Caroline's national profile expanded exponentially following her high-profile appointment, the toxic waves of online commentary and internet speculation intensified to a fever pitch. The digital conversation frequently ignored her professional performance at the press podium, focusing instead with an unhealthy obsession on the mechanics of her marriage. Wild accusations, baseless assumptions, and cruel jokes routinely filled the comment sections of every news article and social media post that mentioned her name. Through every single wave of this intense digital storm, Nicholas remained almost entirely silent, refusing to grant a single media interview, write a rebuttal, or offer a public defense of his character. He deliberately chose to stay firmly in the background. A fiercely private individual who possessed absolutely no desire for social media followers, public applause, or political clout. At the time, this absolute silence was misinterpreted by casual outside observers as a sign of emotional detachment or marital strain. In reality, it would later reveal itself to be a deeply deliberate, profoundly loving choice to protect the sanctuary of their private life, while his wife stood squarely in the blinding spotlight. Part 2. The decision to remain entirely private in the middle of a massive public storm is an incredibly rare choice in modern political culture, where spouses frequently transform into media personalities in their own right, leveraging their proximity to power for personal branding. Nicholas Rixio, however, consistently chose the exact opposite path, refusing to participate in the curated theater that defines life in the nation's capital. There were no carefully staged Instagram posts designed to project a perfect life, no exclusive magazine profiles defending the integrity of his marriage, and no public statements aimed at correcting inaccurate headlines. Even when attending mandatory high-profile public events, official campaign stops, White House dinners, or festive holiday gatherings, he consistently positioned himself slightly behind his wife, remaining attentive but entirely unobtrusive. This calculated restraint was not born out of shyness or a lack of confidence, but rather a profound personal preference for a life measured by substance rather than public perception. This degree of restraint is particularly striking when one considers the sheer volume of intense personal scrutiny and unfair judgment he faced from the moment his wife ascended to her historic role. When Caroline officially became the youngest White House press secretary in American history, intense media attention was a guaranteed certainty. But that curiosity quickly crossed the line from professional interest to invasive personal obsession. Internet comment sections and tabloid headlines fixated entirely on the 32-year age difference, with complete strangers confidently speculating about financial motives and questioning the authenticity of their love. Throughout the entirety of this invasive public trial, Nicholas maintained his silence, refusing to allow the opinions of strangers to dictate his actions or disrupt his peace. What these online critics failed to examine was the ironclad foundation he had spent a lifetime building long before he ever entered the complex orbit of Washington politics. The impressive real estate business that Nicholas built over several decades did not grow through splashy marketing campaigns, celebrity partnerships, or easy loans from wealthy benefactors. It expanded step by step through a series of calculated financial risks, exhaustive physical labor, and a policy of relentless reinvestment that required him to sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term independence. After taking specialized real estate courses during the foundational years of his career, he began targeting distressed properties in coastal areas that major investment firms ignored. The community of Hampton Beach became the epicenter of his long-term investment strategy, a place where he acquired rundown, neglected buildings one single structure at a time. He personally managed the renovations, turning properties that were eyesores into highly functional, desirable rental homes for working-class families. Official public property records reveal a substantial footprint of multiple real estate holdings under his corporate structures, with investments ranging from modest, affordable multifamily units to significantly high-priced commercial acquisitions. His professional journey was marked by severe setbacks that would have completely broken an investor possessed of lesser resolve. In one widely covered local incident, a major commercial property he owned suffered catastrophic, extensive damage from a sudden, violent fire. The precise cause of the devastating blaze was never publicly determined, and the resulting financial impact on his business enterprise was absolutely substantial, threatening to erase years of progress. Yet, true to the character he developed during his difficult youth, he did what he had always done. He quietly rebuilt the structure, reassessed his strategy, and continued moving forward without complaint. For a man who had once been forced to sleep in his car because he literally could not afford the cost of a basic apartment rent, resilience was never a catchy marketing slogan. It was a daily habit. By the time Caroline launched her highly competitive run for the United States Congress, Nicholas had already finalized a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio that guaranteed absolute financial independence. This level of rock-solid financial stability played a massive, understated role in her rapid political ascent, removing the intense financial anxieties that frequently derail young, working-class candidates. Although she ultimately lost that initial congressional election, the massive public exposure elevated her national profile, setting the stage for her future appointment to the White House. When she finally stepped up to take the podium as press secretary, she did so with the immense comfort of knowing that her home life was entirely secure. She has openly and gratefully acknowledged in private circles that his extraordinary professional success provided her with the freedom to fearlessly chase her own ambitious career goals. Following the birth of their beautiful son, Nico, in July, Nicholas made another profound life adjustment, one that was entirely private, unannounced to the media, and simply decided between husband and wife. He made the conscious choice to scale back his professional real estate expansion, stepping away from new acquisitions to prioritize the daily responsibilities of hands-on fatherhood. Caroline has frequently described him to close friends as an incredibly involved, deeply attentive father who completely manages nightly feedings, complex pediatrician schedules, and the small, exhausting daily rituals that define early childhood. While she is standing before a room of aggressive, seasoned journalists fighting to defend administration policy, he is ensuring that bedtime stories are read, meals are prepared, and routines remain perfectly steady. She has always been remarkably candid about the immense difficulty of balancing the around-the-clock demands of her high-profile job with the emotional realities of modern motherhood. She enforces strict personal boundaries whenever possible, fiercely insisting on being home to put her son to sleep and protecting her weekends for uninterrupted family time. The Washington political environment is notoriously unforgiving, demanding absolute devotion, but she insists that motherhood has sharpened her professional focus rather than dividing her loyalties. The primary reason she can operate at such an incredibly high intensity on the world stage, she freely admits, is because she possesses the absolute certainty that her son is perfectly safe in the arms of his father. For many months, this quiet, highly efficient division of domestic responsibility went entirely unnoticed by the mainstream media and the public alike. The loudest public debates surrounding her life continued to center entirely on superficial optics: her young age, her political ambitions, and the ongoing controversies of the administration. Very few commentators paused to consider the intricate internal arrangement and personal sacrifices that made her demanding public schedule sustainable for a young family. Nicholas' absolute public silence was routinely misinterpreted by his critics as a sign of emotional absence or indifference to her career. In stark reality, that silence was the very structural infrastructure that allowed her to shine on the national stage without burning out. This crucial distinction only became clear to the world when Caroline finally chose to speak openly and vulnerably about exactly what her husband had given up for her dreams. The monumental press conference began exactly like any other standard briefing, filled with the familiar, tense atmosphere of political combat and rapid-fire questioning. Inquiries regarding complex legislative policy, ongoing federal investigations, and high-stakes administrative decisions dominated the first 40 minutes of the session. Caroline stood perfectly composed behind the heavy wooden podium, delivering sharp, precise responses with her signature disciplined demeanor. Then, an unexpected question from a reporter completely shifted the entire tone of the room, moving away from political strategy to personal survival. The journalist did not ask about an upcoming bill or a foreign policy crisis, but rather how she was personally managing to survive the overwhelming weight of her reality. The question focused on the intense combination of navigating new motherhood, facing relentless national criticism, and executing one of the most demanding jobs in the world simultaneously. For the first time in her public career, the young press secretary stopped speaking instantly, allowing a long, profound pause to hang over the silent room. Her sharp eyes softened noticeably, and her commanding voice dropped to a much lower, incredibly vulnerable register as she began to address the inquiry. She explained to the gathered press corps that people frequently ask her how she manages to balance the impossible demands of her life without breaking. She stated with absolute clarity that the public perception of her doing it all alone was a complete illusion, a false narrative built by the nature of television. The true credit for her ability to stand before them day after day, she admitted with growing emotion, belonged entirely to her husband. As she continued to speak, a wave of visible emotion completely overtook her, catching the seasoned Washington insiders in the room entirely off guard. It was not a performative, theatrical display of tears, but rather a deeply authentic, raw moment of human vulnerability that commanded absolute silence. She revealed to the press that long before the cameras were ever rolling, Nicholas had made a profound, definitive choice regarding his own life. He had deliberately halted the expansion of his multi-million-dollar business to ensure that their domestic life remained completely stable and peaceful for their child. When she first approached him with the daunting opportunity to return to the political workforce shortly after giving birth, he did not hesitate for a single second. He did not lecture her on the difficulties or express resentment. He simply looked her in the eyes and told her that they would figure it out together as a team. She went on to describe the profound, silent guilt that haunts her every time she walks away from her newborn son to go to work, and the heavy weight of the public criticism that follows her name. What completely shields her from that immense pressure, she explained with a cracking voice, is the absolute knowledge that her son is completely safe and adored by his father. Without that unshakable domestic anchor, she stated, the vicious political attacks would feel infinitely heavier and harder to bear. With his support, however, the loudest criticisms of her detractors simply fade away into meaningless background noise that cannot touch her core. It was absolutely not a political announcement, a strategic piece of spin, or an attempt to deflect from a policy failure. It was a deeply personal confession of gratitude. The woman who had become famous across the country for her sharp, unyielding rebuttals was openly acknowledging her deep vulnerability and dependence on another human being. She was not presenting a calculated power move to the media, but rather honoring a profound partnership built on mutual sacrifice. For the critics who had spent months questioning the authenticity and longevity of their marriage, that single emotional moment completely reframed everything. The obsessive focus on the chronological age gap, the cruel internet headlines, and the endless speculation suddenly seemed entirely irrelevant when compared to the reality of their life. Beyond the sensationalized headlines and the toxic social media threads, the conversation surrounding Caroline Leavitt's marriage underwent a dramatic transformation following that briefing. While public debate regarding the administration's policies continued to rage with its usual intensity, the public perception of her personal life expanded far beyond simple optics. She has consistently and proudly described Nicholas in subsequent profiles as her greatest supporter, her truest friend, and the absolute rock of her existence. He watches every single television interview she conducts and analyzes every press briefing from their home, not out of a desire for political status, but because he cares deeply for her well-being. Their young son has already visited the historic halls of the White House on multiple occasions, a reality that brings immense joy to their extended family. Caroline has shared with close friends that introducing young Nico to the president was an incredibly meaningful milestone, but she continuously emphasizes that genuine family moments matter infinitely more than curated photo opportunities. She occasionally brings her son to her office during quieter moments, yet she fiercely guards his privacy from the intrusive lenses of the press corps. She is the first to admit that her marriage is highly unconventional by the standard definitions of modern society, and she embraces that reality with confidence. For her, being unconventional does not mean their bond is unstable. It means they have successfully chosen an authentic partnership that offers absolute peace in a chaotic world. Part 3. The remarkable journey of Nicholas Rixio before he ever achieved financial success is a testament to the power of human resilience and sheer determination. The long, difficult periods of youth homelessness, intense financial anxiety, and relentless manual labor permanently shaped his foundational perspective on what truly matters in life. Having built a successful career from absolutely nothing through his own sweat and sacrifice, he now applies that exact same level of fierce dedication to the role of fatherhood. Caroline frequently reminds those around her that being a loving wife and a dedicated mother will always be her absolute top priority in life. Her high-profile career in national politics is merely her current job, a temporary assignment in the grand scheme of things, while her family remains her permanent foundation. The emotional announcement she made from the White House podium was never about creating a political scandal or executing a clever media strategy. It was a profound, public expression of deep gratitude toward a man who had completely changed his life to support her dreams. It was about revealing to a cynical world that behind her supreme podium confidence stands a man who deliberately stepped out of the spotlight so she could stand proudly within it. Caroline Leavitt's emotional moment in front of the White House press corps was ultimately not about politics at all. It was about the timeless power of true partnership and mutual sacrifice. When we look past the sensationalized headlines and the endless social media commentary, her marriage challenges our rigid societal expectations in a deeply profound way. It forces us to ask whether love and partnership should be judged by arbitrary numbers and traditional timelines, or by the depth of support, security, and respect two people offer one another. The reality of their daily lives demonstrates that true stability is often found in the most unexpected places, far away from the rigid expectations of the public eye. In a world that is increasingly obsessed with superficial optics and quick judgments, their story serves as a powerful reminder that the most successful partnerships are built on a foundation of quiet sacrifice that the world rarely sees. As she continues to navigate the immense pressures of her historic role, she does so knowing that her ultimate sanctuary remains perfectly intact. The storm of Washington politics will inevitably continue to rage, but the anchor holding her steady is far too strong to be broken by words. It is a bond forged in the quiet spaces of real life, far removed from the performance of the briefing room. Ultimately, the true measure of their relationship is not found in the opinions of online commentators or political analysts, but in the quiet daily moments of family life. It is found in a father reading a bedtime story to his son, while the world watches his wife defend an administration on national television. It is found in a young woman who can face the most hostile room in America with absolute confidence, because she knows exactly who is waiting for her at home. Their story challenges us to look deeper, to move past the easy cynicism of the modern internet age and appreciate the complex, beautiful realities of human connection. It reminds us that behind every powerful public figure, there is often a silent history of sacrifice and support that makes the achievement possible. As the political news cycle moves forward at its usual breakneck pace, the memory of that emotional briefing remains a rare moment of pure humanity in a space defined by calculation. It offered the public a rare glimpse into the true cost of ambition and the immense value of a partner willing to share that burden completely. Whether the public ultimately approves of their unique dynamic or continues to focus on the age gap, the reality inside their home remains unchanged. They have built a life that works for them, a sanctuary of peace and mutual respect that functions perfectly amidst the noise of the nation's capital. In the end, that is the only metric that truly matters for any family surviving the pressures of modern public life. The story of Caroline and Nicholas is a vivid illustration of how unconventional choices can lead to remarkably stable outcomes when rooted in genuine character and mutual respect. It disrupts the standard political narrative that demands perfection, conformity, and curated transparency at all times from those in power. By choosing to live their private life on their own terms, completely independent of public validation, they have reclaimed control over their own narrative. This quiet defiance of expectation is perhaps the most formidable aspect of their partnership, proving that a marriage does not need to make sense to the world to be profoundly successful. As she steps up to the podium for her next briefing, the confidence she projects will carry a deeper meaning for those who know the story. It is a confidence that belongs not just to her, but to the partnership that sustains her every single day behind the scenes. The youngest press secretary in history will continue to make headlines, face intense scrutiny, and shape national communications for the foreseeable future. But the true story of her success will always be tied to the private sacrifices of the man who chose to stand in the shadows. Their journey reminds us that the most significant chapters of our lives are rarely written in public view, but in the quiet, unrecorded moments of love and devotion. It is a story of resilience, partnership, and the enduring power of family in an increasingly chaotic world. As we look to the future, the unique dynamic they have established will likely continue to inspire both curiosity and respect from observers of American politics. It stands as a modern example of how traditional roles can be successfully reimagined to meet the extraordinary demands of an unprecedented career. For Caroline Leavitt, the podium will always represent her professional duty, but her home will always represent her true heart. The balance they have achieved is a rare commodity in Washington, a precious asset that they will undoubtedly continue to guard with fierce determination. In the final analysis, her emotional confession was a gift to a cynical public, a brief reminder that even in the highest corridors of power, love, and sacrifice still hold the ultimate authority. The narrative of their lives continues to unfold, written not by the pens of journalists or the comments of strangers, but by their own choices and shared values. It is a testament to the fact that when two people are truly aligned, no amount of outside pressure can disrupt the foundation they have built. Caroline and Nicholas have proven that they are more than capable of weathering any storm together, secure in their love and their vision for their family's future. Their story remains a compelling reminder that the most powerful force in politics and in life is the quiet strength of a united home. What are your thoughts on how this unique partnership challenges traditional expectations? Does the age gap still matter in your eyes, or does the depth of their mutual sacrifice and support completely redefine the narrative? Share your insights in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss our deep dives into the real stories behind the headlines.